Hitler's World, Part 3. Though Hitler strove to define a world without history, his ideas were altered by his own experiences. The First World War, the bloodiest in history, fought on a continent that thought itself civilized, undid the broad confidence among many Europeans that strife was all to the good. Some Europeans of the far right or the far left, however, drew the opposite lesson. The bloodshed for them had not been extensive enough and the sacrifice incomplete. For the Bolsheviks of the Russian Empire, disciplined and voluntarist Marxists, the war and the revolutionary energies it brought were the occasion to begin the socialist reconstruction of the world. For Hitler, as for many other Germans, the war ended before it was truly decided, the racial superiors taken from the battlefield before they had earned their due. Of course, the sentiment that Germany should win was widespread, and not only among militarists or extremists. Thomas Mann, the greatest of the German writers and later an opponent of Hitler, spoke of Germany's, inverted commas, rights to domination, to participate in the administration of the planet, close the inverted commas. Edith Stein, a brilliant German philosopher who developed a theory of empathy, considered, inverted commas, it out of the question that we will now be defeated, close the inverted commas. After Hitler came to power, she was hunted down in her convent and murdered as a Jew. For Hitler, the conclusion of the First World War demonstrated the ruin of the planet. Hitler's understanding of its outcome went beyond the nationalism of his fellow Germans, and his response to defeat only superficially resembled the general resentment about lost territories. For Hitler, the German defeat demonstrated that something was crooked in the whole structure of the world. It was the proof that Jews had mastered the methods of nature. If a few thousand German Jews had been gassed at the beginning of the war, he maintained, Germany would have won. He believed that Jews typically subjected their victims to starvation and saw the British naval blockade of Germany during and after the First World War as an application of this method. It was an instance of a permanent condition and the proof of more suffering to come. So long as Jews starved Germans, rather than Germans starving whom they pleased, the world was in disequilibrium. From the defeat of 1918, Hitler drew conclusions about any future conflict. Germans would always triumph if Jews were not involved. Yet, since Jews dominated the entire planet and had penetrated the minds of Germans with their ideas, the struggle for German power must take two forms. A war of simple conquest, no matter how devastatingly triumphant, could never suffice. In addition to starving inferior races and taking their land, Germans needed to simultaneously defeat the Jews, whose global power and insidious universalism would undermine any such healthy racial campaign. Thus, Germans had the rights of the strong against the weak and the rights of the weak against the strong. As the strong, they needed to dominate the weaker races they encountered. As the weak, they had to liberate all races from Jewish domination. Hitler thus united two great motivating forces of the world politics of his century, colonialism and anti-colonialism. Hitler saw both the struggle for land and the struggle against the Jews in drastic exterminatory terms, and yet he saw them differently. The struggle against inferior races for territory was a matter of the control of parts of the Earth's surface. The struggle against the Jews was ecological, since it concerned not a specific racial enemy or territory, but the conditions of life on Earth. The Jews were, inverted commas, a pestilence, a spiritual pestilence, worse than the Black Death, close the inverted commas. Since they fought with ideas, their power was everywhere, and anyone could be their knowing or unknowing agent. The only way to remove such a plague was to eradicate it at the source, inverted commas. If nature designed the Jew to be the material cause of the decline and fall of the nations, said Hitler, it provided these nations with the possibility of a healthy reaction, close the inverted commas. The elimination had to be complete. If one Jewish family remained in Europe, it could infect the entire continent. The fall of man could be undone. The planet could be healed. Inverted commas. A people that is rid of its Jews, said Hitler, returns spontaneously to the natural order. Close the inverted commas. Hitler's views of human life and the natural order were total and circular. All questions about politics were answered as if they were questions about nature. All questions about nature were answered by reference back to politics. The circle was drawn by Hitler himself. If politics and nature were not sources of experience and perspective, but empty stereotypes that exist only in relation to each other, then all power rested in the hands of he who circulated the clichés. Reason was replaced by references, argumentation by incantation. The, in inverted commas, struggle, as the title of the book gave away, was, in inverted commas, mine, Hitler's. The totalistic idea of life as struggle placed all power to interpret any event in the mind of its author. Equating nature and politics abolished not only political but also scientific thought. For Hitler, science was a completed revelation of the law of racial struggle, a finished gospel of bloodshed, not a process of hypothesis and experiment. It provided a vocabulary about zoological conflict, not a fount of concepts and procedures that allowed ever more extensive understanding. It had an answer but no questions. The task of man was to submit to this creed rather than willfully impose specious Jewish thinking upon nature. Because Hitler's worldview required a single circular truth that embraced everything, it was vulnerable to the simplest of pluralisms. For example, that humans might change their environment in ways that might in turn change society. If science could change the ecosystem such that human behavior was altered, then all of his claims were groundless. Hitler's logical circle, in which society was nature because nature was society, in which men were beasts because beasts were men, would be broken. Hitler accepted that scientists and specialists had purposes within the racial community, to manufacture weapons, to improve communications, to advance hygiene. Stronger races should have better guns, better radios and better health, the better to dominate the weaker. He saw this as a fulfillment of nature's command to struggle, not as a violation of its laws. Technical achievement was proof of racial superiority, not evidence of the advance of general scientific understanding. Inverted commas. Everything that we today admire on this earth, wrote Hitler, the scholarship and art, the technology and inventions, are nothing more than the creative product of a few peoples and perhaps originally of a single race. Close the inverted commas. No race, however advanced, could change the basic structure of nature by any innovation. Nature had only two variants: the paradise in which higher races slaughter the lower, and the fallen world in which supernatural Jews deny higher races the bounty they are due and starve them when possible. Hitler understood that agricultural science posed a specific threat to the logic of his system. If humans could intervene in nature to create more food without taking more land, his whole system collapsed. He therefore denied the importance of what was happening before his eyes, the science of what was later called the, in inverted commas, Green Revolution, the hybridization of grains, the distribution of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, the expansion of irrigation. Even, in inverted commas, in the best case, he insisted hunger must outstrip crop improvements. There was, in inverted commas, a limit to all scientific improvements. Indeed, all of, inverted commas, the scientific methods of land management, close the inverted commas, had already been tried and had failed. There was no conceivable improvement, now or in the future, that would allow Germans to be fed, inverted commas, from their own land and territory, close the inverted commas. Food could only be safeguarded by conquest of fertile territory, not by science that would make German territory more fertile. Jews deliberately encouraged the contrary belief in order to dampen the German appetite for conquest and prepare the German people for destruction. Inverted commas. It is always the Jew, wrote Hitler in this connection, who seeks and succeeds in implanting such lethal ways of thinking. Close the inverted commas. Hitler had to defend his system from human discovery, which was as much of a problem for him as human solidarity. Science could not save the species because, in the final analysis, all ideas were racial, nothing more than aesthetic derivatives of struggle. The contrary notion that ideas could actually reflect nature or change it was a, in inverted commas, Jewish lie and a, in inverted commas, Jewish swindle. Hitler maintained that, inverted commas, man had never conquered nature in any matter, close the inverted commas. Universal science, like universal politics, must be seen not as human promise, but as Jewish threat. The world's problem, as Hitler saw it, was that Jews falsely separated science and politics and made delusive promises for progress and humanity. The solution he proposed was to expose Jews to the brutal reality that nature and society were one and the same. They should be separated from other people and forced to inhabit some bleak and inhospitable territory. Jews were powerful in that their, in inverted commas, unnature drew others to them. They were weak in that they could not face brutal reality. Resettled to some exotic locale, they would be unable to manipulate others with their unearthly concepts and would succumb to the law of the jungle. Hitler's first obsession was an extreme natural setting, in inverted commas, an anarchic state of an island, close the inverted commas. Later his thoughts turned to the wastes of Siberia. It was, in inverted commas, a matter of indifference, he said, whether Jews were sent to one or the other. In August 1941, about a month after Hitler made that remark, his men began to shoot Jews in massacres on the scale of tens of thousands at a time, in the middle of Europe, in a setting they had themselves made anarchic, over pits dug in the black earth of Ukraine. Goodbye.